And finally, there's now the Generation Z. These are people born between 2000 and 2010 and onwards, but it's not relevant. They're not relevant to us here today. I'd like to move now on to the second issue, and that is individual characteristics that interact and drive the adult learning process. So we're moving on to the second of our topics, the individual characteristics that interact and drive the adult learning process. In this section, we'll look at some of the following characteristics: emotional characteristics, physical characteristics, mental characteristics, and that will include things like readiness to learn, problem orientation and time perspective, social characteristics, and finally the motivation to learn. One of the messages in the preceding outline about the generational cohort characteristics is that adult learners, irrespective of what cohort they come from, are far from being the empty pail that you as a tutor might fill with knowledge. Indeed, quite the opposite is likely to be the case. Your role as a tutor is often to help learners reorganize their existing thoughts, knowledge and skills around the learning task at hand. What does the learner already know that will help them move forward? As a prerequisite for helping adults learn, Draves in his book How to Teach Adults suggests that what's important is to understand how they learn. As complex human beings, we all bring to the learning situation a combined set of emotional, physical, mental and social characteristics that makes each one of us unique. One way to approach this diversity in learners is with variety in our teaching approach. It's best to do this. It's important to understand that some of the characteristics that influence the learning of adults. Let's look at each of them now. Emotional characteristics. Adults' emotional states are inextricably tied up with their ability to learn. For learning to be effective, an adult must be emotionally comfortable with the learning situation. Although most adults who come to learning situations are mentally ready to learn in terms of their cognitive capacity, but they may be inhibited or feel insecure by a poor self-image or uncertainty about what's involved in this learning experience. Feelings of inadequacy can be many and varied. They may simply stem from a lack of success in previous learning experiences, particularly those at school, the subject matter to be learnt, or simply growing older and having been away from any form of learning for a long time. In relation to physical characteristics, our physical state affects our capacity to learn. Adults are attuned to comfortable surroundings and tend to be sensitive to discomfort. And this may be things like the stuffiness or the chill in their surroundings in the room that they're learning in. Physical discomfort can also arise from a learner's lack of visual and hearing acuity. Positioning of text material and the proximity of the tutor or other participants is important. Most learners will not raise the issue of sight or hearing difficulties, so it's important that the tutor needs to be aware of their interaction with the participants, so that tutors need to be aware of these less than obvious things that may be affecting the learner. I'm sure that many kiosks around the country have been located in a, quote, an available space, not one that has necessarily been selected because it was free from street noise, with adequate heating or air conditioning, and free from general interruptions. As likely as not, the availability of a power source may have been the determining factor. So it may be worth giving some time to identifying sources of disruption and trying to do something about them. If things cannot be changed, at least let the learners know that these noises and interruptions are the norms when they're working at that kiosk. Looking at mental characteristics, a readiness to learn. Adults come, for the most part, ready to learn, otherwise they probably would not be there. Part of their readiness may come from a desire for personal inquiry, to know more about something. In the case of kiosk participants, it may be a desire to know more about the computer as a resource, to enable them to surf the net, to email and have a basis for conversation with grandchildren, or to overcome the generational divide. Any of these reasons can provide a strong motivation to learn. Adults also have a problem orientation. Learning for children is often subject and assessment oriented. Adult learning, on the other hand, is usually more problem-centered. Adults want to learn to solve or address a particular problem and are more satisfied with their learning if it applies to everyday experiences, is practical or current. From a time perspective, an adult's time perspective is also different from that of a child. For a child, time, both past and present, is a vast quantity. A year is a long time ago and the future is endless. For an adult, time quickly becomes less expendable as they grow older. The future is not so endless. In a learning situation, adults prefer what can be learned today or in the near future, or what can be learned over a longer, rather than what can be learned over a longer period of time. This can lead to adults being more concerned with specific, narrow topics of relevance rather than broad, generalized or abstract subjects. A readiness to learn coupled with a problem-solving orientation and specific time perspective all contribute to an internal motivation by older adults to learn. Social characteristics. Some of the most significant characteristics of the adult learner is the abundance and variety of their experiences. Your participants will bring with them different background, occupational, types of upbringing, schooling and possibly ethnic experiences. Each has a different mix of experiences and perceptions when entering a learning environment as an adult. School experiences can be a strong determinant in how the adult learning experience is received. Therefore, it's a good idea, generally speaking, to reduce the association to formal schooling in your references, style and approach to providing the learning experience for the older adult. The imprint of our schooling, Drave suggests, is still in all of us, and for some, that memory may not be a good one. In relation to group interaction, generally the Broadband for Seniors kiosk interaction for participants will be in a small group. Nevertheless, while even a small group setting provides an opportunity to display talent and knowledge for some, it can also be perceived as a threatening situation to others who may fear exposing their lack of talent and knowledge. So it's critical that you as a tutor are not the one using this group to display your knowledge, skill and ego at the cost of developing confidence in your learners. In relation to the subject, most adults coming to the kiosk will have some perception of what learning about the computer and the internet will lead to, even if they are unaware of the process for learning that lies ahead of them. Some may have a degree of proficiency, others may have be acquainted more superficially. Some may have had a negative encounter or gained misinformation. Ideally, as a tutor, you will probably get to understand where your learner is coming from and make it clear to them what is involved in their learning journey with you and where it will lead. In that process, you will also clear up any apparent misconceptions. The motivation to learn. As we have mentioned earlier, the total of one's mental, emotional, physical and social state determines a person's motivation to learn. The quest for motivation has led to much thought on the subject over the years. Many adult learning authorities advocate encouraging self-directed learning. And what they mean by that is not pushing for change, but rather letting individuals develop best under their own steam, and once shown the road that they need to be travelling on, let them devise the best way to get along that road. Most adult learning experts agree that while the motivation comes initially from the learner, there is a responsibility for maintaining that motivation, and that rests not only with the learner, but also with the teacher, the tutor, and also the way the program itself is managed. As a teacher-tutor, you can help to or hinder another's attempts to learn. You can do this by failing to recognise limits, ignoring or constructing barriers, and that might be quite unconsciously. By not understanding how a person learns, you can be a negative influence. On the other hand, by understanding something about the drivers influencing learning, facilitating learning and helping your learners learn, you can be a positive influence for them. Moving on to section 3, the older learner as the older adult as a learner. The history of older adults as learners is centuries old, of course. But what's not so old is the formal study of older adults as learners. In the time available today, we won't even try to explore this history or subsequent research in any depth. Rather, I'll present some general observations that will hopefully dispel any negative stereotypes that we might hold about the capacities of older adults to learn. Some of the earliest research postulated that we were all in cognitive decline up until about the age of 45, at which time a sharp decline in learning ability could be expected. Other research showed that we were all in decline until about the age 60. There was also a time when older people mistakenly believed that they could not learn as well as younger people and were easily discouraged and simply did not actively engage in any form of learning. While there is no doubt that there are effects from aging. For many people, hearing and sight can decline with age. Despite these and other physical changes, people continue to differ in character and personality because of age and change as they grow older. As they grow older, they may become wiser, they may become slower, they may become more acute, less patient, more tolerant, hard of hearing, less easily fooled, disillusioned, less anxious, more rigid, freer, insecure, and in fact, being as diverse in character as every other group of individuals in society. Short-term memory is said to decline with age, but there is no clearly identifiable age of onset. Older people do slow up, however, they can learn as well as younger people, but they may take longer to do it. Older learners begin to sacrifice speed for accuracy and may choose not to move on to the next step until they are sure that they have mastered the immediate one. One strategy for accommodating older learners so they can work at their own pace is to remove any suggestion that learning is some kind of a race. Encourage learners to measure their progress against their own previous achievements rather than the performance or pace of others around them. Moving on to section 4 now, how good tutors can help older adults learn. It's fairly well accepted today that learning involves change and that learning is the process of gradually bringing about change in the areas of knowledge, skills, attitudes and behaviour. By looking at each of these areas separately, we may be able to identify some strategies that might help you as a tutor to facilitate better learning with your participants. It may be that these 4 kinds of learning also have relevance and resonance in varying ways to those participants coming to your kiosk. For example, the knowledge component may involve your participants in seeing a better understanding of the potential for themselves for the use of broadband, computers and the internet. Knowledge about what this resource mix can really do for them. The skill component may become relevant when your participant wants to know how to physically use the computer and the software that drives it. The attitude component may come to the fore in terms of the content and use your participant wishes to make of this resource. For example, they may see the computer as only a means for emailing the family and not as a resource for news and entertainment, or for the use of Skype to broaden the communication functionality beyond email.